Okay, so let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining. You can see on your screen the Research Nova Scotia logo. At least I hope you can. If you can't, Megan can come on and let me know. I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement to recognize that we are in Mi'kma'ki, and which is a land governed by a series of peace and friendship treaties dating back hundreds of years, which provides to us all an individual obligation to review and understand what that means, and to give effect to the intent of those who signed those treaties all those years ago of formulating a way to live together on this land. So I'd like to acknowledge that and before we begin. So the session this afternoon is to go through the opportunity known as Ear to Ground, which opened last Friday. So if that's the webinar you intended to attend, you are in the right place. So what I'm going to do is give a presentation for approximately 20 or 30 minutes, going through the major elements of what is part of this opportunity, this funding opportunity, and then a time to respond to questions. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or at least it's on the bottom of my screen within Zoom. And so please put your questions in there, and you can put them in whenever you like, but we'll go back and visit at the end, simply because part of the presentation may cover that as we go rather than picking up questions as we go. So I'm going to start with highlighting the Research Nova Scotia mandate to provide the context, which is quite important for how this opportunity came together. So on the 1st of May of this year, so about 6 or 7 months ago, as a result of changes under Bill 12 in the Nova Scotia legislature, the Research Nova Scotia Act was amended. And among the things that it did, it enabled the Minister of Advanced Education to provide to us the research priorities which govern how we are to provide funding. And so you'll see there that I've underlined the key sentence. And this is a screenshot from the priorities that the minister provided to us on the 1st of May. So there are really 4 key areas which you will note, or that I have noted on the left-hand side of the page that relate to those priorities. The first is that this is overtly an economic agenda, that the minister has assigned 7 economic outcomes that they wish to see emerge from the investment that Research Nova Scotia is making in research projects, including this E2G round. And the first box that you'll see on the top of your page there is a list of those 7 outcomes, which have been grouped by the minister into 2 different areas around growth and productivity. So that's the first major change. The second is that 3 sectors have been identified as those areas in which our investments are to be made. And those are actually listed in the bottom box. Those 3 priority sectors have been identified and further described in the minister's document. The third major element is that there is this expectation that we connect the inputs or the research activity and the research outputs that result to those outcomes. And that middle box really describes, well, uses the language or provides the language that the minister used to highlight the requirement for us as a funder and funding recipients, those who are undertaking research, to be able to show measurable changes in those outcomes. And then finally, immediate effect. That's not a function of anything you'll read so much on the page, except to say that the minister provided these to come into effect on the 1st of May. So this is not something for which there was a transition that was provided. As of that date, the sorts of research activities that we were permitted to fund were described by that document that was provided to us. The other thing which was in that set of priorities was this requirement to develop and implement a strategic plan. So to the extent that Research Nova Scotia was out and about engaging with the community over the course of the summer and the fall. It was really as we developed a new plan to give effect to those priorities, which I'll summarize here. I just will want to pause there for a moment just to note that the priorities that the minister provided have been posted on our website, and it's posted as we receive them. It's not terribly long. It's about 2.5, 3 pages. And I certainly encourage you to look at those, find them and have a look at them, and use that or use the context that it provides in shaping the proposal that you're looking to produce. So this slide provides a summary of the strategy that was developed and approved by the Research Nova Scotia Board at the end of September, end of September, and which underlies the ear to the ground opportunity that's before us now. So the first, of course, is the economic agenda, the priority sectors, and the outcomes. That's features prominently in the strategy based on the revisions to the minister's priorities. We have 3 objectives of the corporation, which are listed there. And this one, of course, the ear to ground is germane to that first one around organizing, coordinating, and supporting the funding of research. And I will speak a little bit to the relationship between capacity and supporting the research community in the context of research granting a little bit later in this presentation. So the first thing to highlight, or what is in that strategy document, which is also online, is that we are funding research as we have defined it in that document. And I know that may seem like a straightforward thing to address, but the diverse interpretations of what would constitute research needed to be settled within this document. And you'll see some aspects that are described in that box, which then flow through into the ear to the ground opportunity before us, and will help structure your proposal to ensure that it meets what it is that we are able to fund. So not only does it have those 5 characteristics, but we are focused on sector building activities. So this is not an opportunity in which we will be providing funding for an individual end user, like a company or government department or a community organization that wishes to secure specific research work in order to assist them in doing a thing, whatever that might be. If it's produce a product, then that company would need to embark on R&D work in order to do it. That's not what this opportunity is for. This is for across a number of different participants or across the sector to pursue opportunities or remove impediments that can unlock the kind of economic outcomes that the minister has sought for us to achieve. So that's what that second one, sector building, goes into. And then finally, we describe in that strategy 2 different pathways to find that research and achieve those outcomes. And of course, we'll be spending the rest of this presentation talking about the ear to the ground opportunity for us, which we anticipate supporting between 10 and 20 per year. This is an estimate on our part. It will depend a lot on what comes in from the community, both the size and the number, and how well they're suited to what the parameters of the program are. Of course, it depends as well on the budget that is provided by the board of directors to Research Nova Scotia. But some of the other parameters are established. These are relatively shorter term projects, certainly in comparison to some of the other opportunities that we have. So 6 months to 3 years with a maximum project value of $500,000. And the immediate opportunity that's before us that opened last week and closes in January has a total budget of $1.5 million. So we are looking for not just within the priority sectors, but achievement of those outcomes. And we will be taking in proposals through our online grant management system called Jura, which is available at our website, which is noted there. And the characteristics, most of which I've touched on already, are listed at the bottom of the page. for what would constitute a ear to the ground proposal that we're looking to find through this process. So I've got a couple of slides that are screen grabs from our website. So as this is from this morning, at that point, we had 7 weeks and 6 days to go, a few hours less at this point, but still we've got quite a long runway over the next little while to get these proposals in. So the deadline is the 21st of January. And where the arrow points there and towards the button is to the opportunity guide. And that's quite an extensive document which describes in considerable detail the purpose that we have for this particular opportunity, and considerable detail as well in how to think through the proposal that you might be considering to successfully submit a proposal through this process. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking through for the next sort of the second half of this presentation is based on material that is in that program guide. So I certainly encourage you to have a good read of that and have a look. And that's what the first page of it looks like. So it is a PDF. And when you click on it, it gives you the boilerplate information on the front with key dates and details around the opportunity. And then the detail follows after that. Within that document, there is a list of key resources with links. And so if you are looking for the strategy, this is a convenient place to go and find it. Within that strategy itself, there is a link to the minister's priorities. So if you're unable to navigate to it directly from the website to find the minister's priorities, if you go into the strategy, there is a link to a PDF of those priorities directly. And so you can use that to help frame things out. And so there's a fair bit of information. As it says, the recording of this webinar will also be posted there, and that will live on our website as well. You'll see down at the bottom, there is an email address that's is at apply@researchns.ca. That is actively monitored by a real person, and questions are answered as soon as we can get to them. And so if you have questions from technical issues around accessing Jura or any questions about interpretation of what words meant or something doesn't make sense, then that's the email address to use to pose those questions. The written application has the expected elements that you would need to put in a proposal, looking for applicant names and host and all the rest of the details around the budget and timelines and so on. And I'm going to walk through some of the different elements of how that material will be reviewed through the assessment process. But if there's any elements, each of these bullet points are a subheading in that program guide, and there's a considerable amount of detail provided there. So if after reviewing what is meant by, say, work plan or research design, if that's not clear, then the email address, which is again there, is the best first place to look, and we will respond to your questions. So in the program guide, you'll see a somewhat complex or complicated looking flow diagram for how we will deal with proposals once things close on the 21st of January. So it looks somewhat complicated, but it's actually reasonably straightforward as we want to systematically and with some speed move through the evaluation process. So the first at the top, of course, is the submission, but then the first thing we will do is we will do an initial relatively high level screening of those applications. And that's really in two ways. We do a basic eligibility and completeness test, make sure that the applicant is actually eligible to apply, that the proposal fits within the parameters. If it's asking for $1 million over 6 years, that's beyond what this program is capable of doing. So it's the kind of core check to make sure that those basic parameters are covered. as well as a high level review about fit or suitability. And this really is high level, but if there are things that are clearly outside what we are permitted to fund, we are not going to go on to the next step of a more in-depth review or scientific peer review if it really has no chance of proceeding through. And so that initial screen will remove any that don't fit, and any applicants or anyone who has submitted for which they are screened out will be notified. And in fact, although it says those who are screened out will be notified, everyone will be notified so that it will be clear what has happened at that initial stage. So after that initial stage, there's two things that are going to happen in parallel. And the first is that the proposal as written and submitted will be sent to scientific merit reviewers or peer reviewers. So this is an arm's length objective review that is done by those qualified to make an assessment of the proposal and its merits. So that will depend on the subject matter and the contents of the proposal. We will find a review group in order to make that assessment of the quality on a scientific dimension or scientific methods around methodology and feasibility of the particular proposal. And the reason I've written sufficiency and not desirability is that we are not asking the peer reviewers whether this is a good idea or a useful thing to do in the context of achieving those outcomes. We're asking that if those outcomes are likely and desirable from the review on the other side, then does this have sufficient scientific merit to warrant support? So if you want to think of it in the following way, it is a condition, not an objective that we're assessing. It is any support that we provide is conditional on a sufficiently high level of scientific quality. And that other side, I guess, it brings us to the second component of the application, which is the pitch and discussion. So this is a different element for Research Nova Scotia, sort of. And the reason I say sort of is that as we've worked over the past 5 or 6 years, we've increasingly been using a direct engagement with applicants to better understand the potential value of the proposal and to clarify things that aren't clear necessarily to us or that we wish to check. And so we have been using this kind of instrument in the recent past, and this is formalizing it and making it available across all participants. And this will include an opportunity for a 5-minute presentation by the applicant and 15 minutes for questions. Oftentimes, there's lots of other things that are interesting to get into, but in anticipation of a fairly significant level of interest in this opportunity, we need to be able to schedule these and move them through with some speed. So we're going to have to kind of cap them to that level. You will be speaking, or the applicant will be speaking to a set of people listening who will be very familiar with the application. So it's not an opportunity to summarize, it's an opportunity to really present the expected benefit, provide any extra context, or supplement any matters around achieving the outcomes that you believe requires emphasis or additional work to what was provided in the written component. It is not a scientific peer review. That is being done separately. And what is presented verbally, it won't go into the scientific review component. This is really about an evaluation against the desirability against those 5 criteria, which I'll speak to in just a moment. And then the outcome of both the review of the written material as well as the pitch and discussion, then we will complete a much more in-depth review against the criteria of this particular opportunity, which is those 5 assessment elements, which I'm going to now pause and just refer to directly, given the importance of these for the funding success of applicants. So this is in the program guide, and this is a summary of what each of those five are. In the appendix, Appendix 1 goes into considerably more detail about what each of these mean. Just like Appendix 2 goes into considerably more detail about what the scientific merit review will be evaluating and looking at and providing input on. So these are the five elements against which proposals that arrive will be reviewed and considered and selected. So just returning back to our flow diagram, in that assessment, that's what's occurring in that box. We'll be reviewing those five different elements and coming to terms or coming to a conclusion on where we see it fitting in each of those different five areas. You'll see that there is a direct arrow from the scientific merit review down into the next stage, which is where we then bring all of the proposals together and attach into or consider the conclusions of the scientific merit review. So this is where we will ensure that the quality of the science as proposed in the written submission meets quality standards and allows us to evaluate all of those proposals as a group to ensure that we are coming to a position on each individual proposal that is based both on the evaluation elements and the quality of the scientific aspects of the particular proposal, which then feeds in that final step, which is an integrated review, where we'll bring together all the proposals and consider them as a cohort. This is a feature that is part of many funding competitions, and we're just being clear that this is something that we need to consider based on available resources. As you can imagine, our total budget for this round is $1.5 million. And with the opportunity to request a budget of up to $500,000, I expect that we will be confronted with choices around whether we fund fewer, larger, or more that have lower cost. We'll want to see distribution across the different sectors, the three sectors. We'll be looking for different opportunities or different pathways to the impact towards those outcomes. And so we'll be using this opportunity to ensure that the group of proposals that we're looking to accept meet the full dimensions of what we are trying to achieve through this process. And all of this we want to have done by the end of March so that we can have agreements in place and flow funds to recipients without delay. And part of the rationale for that quick turnaround is that, as you may recall from a previous slide, the ear to ground is not a once and done kind of process. We are looking to open this twice per year, approximately spring and fall. We'll try and figure out how what timing best fits for the different elements, when to open, how long to give, review process, and so on. But the idea is that if your idea isn't ready or your proposal can't be pulled together, there's going to be another opportunity almost as soon as, although of course there'll be some delay as this closes, the next opportunity is really just around the corner. Also allows us to learn from this particular pilot and build that into a better process for next time. Because I can tell you, we are not going to get everything right. We are not going to be as clear as we had hoped, or there are going to be things that come up that we hadn't thought of. And so we need to be able to apply those lessons as early as possible and reopen to the community to provide an opportunity to apply for funding again. It also coincides with the start of our financial year, which means that the board can provide us with additional funding. It may be that what we learn out of the demand on this pilot that's open now suggests that we need additional or less of a total funding envelope for an ear to ground round. So the experience that we have in this in what's underway now will inform across all those different dimensions to what gets opened as a regular process for this organization early in the new fiscal year. So a few points of emphasis that I'd like to make, and I think I only have maybe 2 or 3 slides left. So as I said, 2 opportunities per year. If there are gaps or deficiencies or insufficient budget, but otherwise a quality proposal, there is an opportunity to resubmit or to revise and resubmit on a relatively quick turnaround. And as I've already said, this is a pilot and we are learning. Clarifications and corrections will be communicated. We are active users of our website. If you are of a mind that you think you'll apply, the thing I encourage you to do is go on to the grant management system, Jura, register, get your name and email in there, because any updates or clarifications can be distributed once we have that point of contact. And in the spirit of, clarifications and corrections, one thing we're already going to modify, which won't change the way you apply, but in the program guide, we mentioned that the pitch will be done either in person as a preferred or remotely as required. And on consideration, given the challenge of scheduling these things and how tight the timeline is, but also the realities of winter travel, we're going to go to a full online model just so that everyone will be working to that same process through an online environment. We should all be used to that after however many years in the pandemic. So that should facilitate a simpler pitch and discussion process for that component of the evaluation. At the risk of overemphasis, I do really strongly encourage you to connect these two and review the minister's priorities and the Research Nova Scotia strategy, because this really does direct how we will be making funding choices amongst what I expect to be a lot of good options before us. And also to pay attention to the definition of research and to look at the proposal in the context of how the outcomes are sector building in their nature. There is a lot of material or a lot of information in the program guide on both of those dimensions. And it is important because these really do define the suitability of the proposals for this particular funding opportunity. Some questions that we've already had. So we've been open for slightly less than a week, but we've been contacted through that email address. And so there's a couple of questions that have come up already. And I thought since we're having a webinar, I'll address some of them directly now. And then maybe they'll cover off questions that would have otherwise come up through the Q&A session at the end of this. So the first is, can this process be used for match funding? And the answer is yes. So this is not at its core as a purpose a match funding opportunity, but match funding can be an extremely efficient way to secure resources greater than what we can provide in order to undertake the work. But what we're aiming for are the outputs that are leading to the outcomes. And the outcome that we're seeking is not greater resources from other funders. What we're seeking are the outcomes that are on offer from the completion of a project. The second bullet point mentions the CFI timeframe. So whether under any number of the CFI or the Canada Foundation for Innovation offerings, we've been in touch frequently with CFI as the priorities of the organization changed, and we're undergoing our strategy development. So they are aware of the direction that we've gone. We've discussed the implications for their timelines, and they have agreed that any timeframe that they have for successful applicants to secure match funding that concludes before we have completed our process, they will delay until we are done. So that gives until the end of March. So if you happen to be in a position of having secured CFI match and are looking for this as the mechanism to secure the other co-funding portion, and the deadline is before the end of March, the CFI has agreed to push that back to enable our decision process to move its way through. And I have to say that CFI has been very accommodating and understanding in that regard. There's been some questions around the three sectors and how they matter, I guess. And there's really 2 points on this front. The first is that those describe the three areas in which we are permitted to use funds to support. So it is not simply a key word that if you consider the work you do to fit within natural resources, climate change, and clean energy, which is one, life sciences, health sciences, which is the second, and construction and transportation, that in itself is enough. It is working in those areas, but to achieve the outcomes. Within the minister's set of priorities, there are objectives attached to each of those sectors. So you will see in the program guide that there's a need to identify the sector that you're in, but also which of those objectives that you are working towards. And then the link to the outcomes is how, in working on that pathway to achieving that outcome is clear. So, for instance, one of the objectives in construction and transportation is increase efficiency of movement of people and products. And so if that's the one to which you'll tie, you would connect the research work that you're proposing to the objective of increasing that efficiency, and then provide detail on a plausible pathway to having an impact or realizing the outcome across one or more of those 7 outcome areas. We've had some questions around whether quality of life, improved healthcare, or more efficient healthcare system, where that fits within kind of the economic agenda that's been provided. And our answer in that regard is that you need to make the argument in the context of achieving those outcomes. And that's not a non-answer, that's a real answer. That means that we've been provided with an expectation that the research we fund meets those outcomes. So if you view the work that you do is within the category of improving the delivery of the healthcare system, articulate what that means or how that works in the context of one or more of those 7 outcomes. So we are not precluding at this point the possibility that something can't fit. It is the obligation of the applicant to be able to demonstrate and to make convincing argument that the delivery of that research work has a connection to one or more of those 7 outcomes. There's been some questions around training, HQP, and early career researchers, or ECR. And there's a couple of things to mention. The first is this is not in and of itself have an objective of capacity building. So we as an organization in the past have run funding competitions that have been largely about building capacity, primarily around health researchers. This is not of that type. However, increasing capacity is part of the objectives of the Research Nova Scotia organization. And so building in what the capacity development or capacity improvement element, whether it's individual or institutional or societal, is on the road to achieving the objectives is a strong point in favor. So consider capacity in the context of achieving the research objectives as opposed to an objective in and of itself of training a certain number of students or employing technicians or workforce readiness. And then with respect to early career researchers, my encouragement is to consider an application, because really the evaluation is on the prospects of achieving those outcomes. And that is not exclusively the purview of those who would be more seasoned within the field. And in some cases, early career researchers may have a lot of what it takes in order to be able to make a convincing argument to that end. You may recall from a previous slide that capacity to deliver is one of the 5 elements. It's actually the 5th of the 5 elements. And so, of course, early career, someone who's earlier in their career, in the context of the capacity to deliver, there may be things that they need that may be more difficult to present within that application because they are earlier in their career. So I recognize that one of our evaluation criteria would seem to suggest that we are highlighting a more advanced stage of career. But I want to make 2 very important points. That capacity to deliver is not just about the applicant, it's about the proposal overall. And so if that includes the host and the research team itself, and we'll be looking for evidence that they are capable of attending to and looking after and delivering on the proposal as proposed. And I would expect, depending on who the applicants are, that within the pitch and question and answer component of this, that if researchers have lots on the go, a reasonable question will be, how is it that you can be sure that sufficient attention will be paid to this work to ensure that you see it through? That is part of capacity to deliver. It's all, and needing some assurance or some sort of conviction around how that work can be done is an important component of this as well. So ultimately, these are judged both against the criteria independently, in that there has to be quality across all 5, but also consistent with what I expect to be where a scenario where there are more desirable and high quality applications than we have funding to be able to fit. They have to be the best among the different options. So it's both a kind of absolute and relative evaluation in the selection process. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to questions.